Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So, today we're diving into something we all go through but rarely pause to unpack emotion versus logic in relationships. Yeah, it's deep, but also super real. You know those moments where your heart is screaming one thing and your mind is saying the total opposite? Like, should you text them first or should you give it space? Should you forgive or protect your peace? That's where the emotional and logical sides kind of go head to head. Let's break it down. When we talk about relationships, the emotional mindset plays a deeply influential role in how we connect with others. It's the part of us that craves intimacy, values empathy, and seeks to be seen, heard, and understood. Acting on feelings is often what makes relationships feel alive. It's that flutter in your chest when you get a sweet message, or the tears that come when you're hurt. Emotions are what give color to the black and white logic of daily routines. And in relationships, they often drive the desire to bond, to care, and to protect. When someone expresses love, affection, or even frustration, it's typically rooted in emotion. These feelings come from personal experiences, past wounds, present hopes, and imagined futures. In moments of conflict, for example, someone driven by emotion might say things like, "I feel like you're not there for me," instead of calmly explaining a situation. This emotional response may not always be entirely rational, but it's real and valid because it stems from their internal experience. People with an emotional mindset often have a strong sense of empathy. They can feel what others are feeling, sometimes even before words are spoken. This makes them great at offering comfort, listening without judgment, and building deep emotional intimacy. However, the same emotional depth can become a double-edged sword. When emotions take the driver's seat entirely, it can lead to impulsive decisions. Think about those moments when someone says, "I don't care, what makes sense, I just love them," or when arguments escalate because neither person wants to pause and process before reacting. Emotional overload can lead to miscommunication, unmet expectations, and cycles of hurt. People might cling to relationships that no longer serve them simply because they feel attached. Emotional thinkers may also take things personally more often, feeling rejection or distance where none was intended. That said, emotion is not a weakness. It's actually a strength when understood and channeled wisely. Emotional awareness allows individuals to express themselves authentically, connect more deeply with others, and bring vulnerability into their interactions, which is essential for trust and intimacy. A relationship without emotion would feel mechanical, transactional, and shallow. Emotion reminds us we're human, flawed, loving, messy, and hopeful. The key is not to suppress emotion, but to be aware of it. Recognizing when feelings are taking over and being able to pause and reflect is what emotional maturity looks like. It allows someone to say, "I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now, and I need to take a minute before we keep talking," rather than lashing out or shutting down. In relationships, the emotional mindset brings passion, depth, and a sense of meaning. It allows people to feel alive, to experience the highs and lows with openness. But for that emotion to truly serve the relationship, it needs balance, and that's where logic eventually comes in. Emotion on its own can start the fire, but without care and intention, it can also burn everything down. The logical mindset in relationships brings structure, clarity, and a sense of control. It's the part of us that pauses before reacting, that weighs pros and cons, and that looks beyond the present moment to consider long-term outcomes. People who lean into logic in relationships often prioritize communication, problem solving, and boundaries. They ask themselves, does this make sense for me? Or, is this relationship aligned with my values and future goals? Rather than simply going with how they feel in the moment. Logical thinkers are often seen as calm during conflict, less reactive, and more focused on solutions rather than blame. They believe in discussing problems instead of arguing about them, and they try to understand root causes rather than getting lost in emotional intensity. This mindset is incredibly helpful in situations that require clarity. For example, when a relationship hits a rough patch, someone with a logical approach might reflect and say, "Let's talk about what's not working," instead of storming off or withdrawing emotionally. They are usually more comfortable setting healthy boundaries, understanding their own needs, and recognizing when something isn't working, even if it's hard. This ability to step back and think clearly can prevent toxic cycles from repeating and can support healthier, more respectful dynamics. However, logic on its own doesn't always make space for the messiness of human emotion. Relationships aren't just decisions, they're lived experiences filled with moments that don't always make sense. When someone is overly logical, they might come off as distant, cold, or emotionally unavailable. They may struggle to offer comfort during emotional moments because they're more focused on fixing the issue rather than just being present. This can create emotional gaps between partners, where one person feels unsupported or unloved simply because their emotional needs aren't being acknowledged. Over-relying on logic can also lead to avoiding vulnerability. Someone might avoid expressing how deeply they care for someone out of fear that it's not rational. Or they might talk themselves out of a meaningful connection because it doesn't check every box logically. Even if the emotional bond is strong, it's possible to make choices that seem smart on paper but feel empty in reality. This can lead to regret, especially when relationships are treated more like business decisions than human connections. That said, logic is not the enemy of love, it's a support system. It's what helps people stay grounded, especially during emotionally overwhelming times. It protects individuals from acting on every passing feeling and encourages thoughtfulness. In a balanced relationship, logic can be the steady hand that helps navigate emotional storms. It keeps partners from saying things they'll regret, helps them communicate clearly, and ensures that important life decisions like moving in together, getting married, or ending a relationship are made with intention. The goal isn't to choose between logic and emotion, but to know when to use each. Logic helps love last, but it's love that gives logic its purpose in the first place. When emotion dominates in a relationship, everything feels heightened: the love, the anger, the joy, and the hurt. This emotional intensity can create powerful connections between two people, often making the relationship feel passionate and deeply meaningful. People who lead with emotion tend to express their feelings openly, respond quickly to emotional cues, and are deeply affected by their partner's behavior and words. This makes relationships feel alive and full of energy, where every interaction seems to matter. When someone you love smiles at you, it can light up your entire day. When they say something hurtful, even unintentionally, it can feel like a sharp wound. That's the power of emotion. It magnifies both the highs and the lows. In emotionally driven relationships, partners might feel incredibly close, like they can't live without each other. This bond can lead to moments of tenderness, spontaneous gestures of love, and a willingness to sacrifice for one another. But this same emotional intensity can also cause conflict to escalate quickly. A simple disagreement can turn into a major argument because emotions overpower logic. Someone might shout, cry, or say things they don't mean, simply because they're overwhelmed. When feelings are running the show, there's less room for patience, reflection, or compromise in the moment. Emotionally dominant relationships can also be impulsive. Decisions are made based on feelings rather than facts or future consequences. For instance, a person might break up during a heated argument only to regret it later. Or they may stay in a relationship that no longer serves them, simply because they feel too attached or fear hurting the other person. These emotional decisions, though sincere, can create instability over time. When emotions constantly shift from one extreme to another, it can leave both partners feeling exhausted and uncertain. At the same time, leading with emotion doesn't mean someone is irrational or weak. In fact, it takes a lot of courage to be emotionally vulnerable, to say, "I love you," first, to apologize sincerely, or to admit when you're scared. Emotional openness is what helps partners understand each other on a deeper level. It builds empathy, which is essential for emotional intimacy. Without emotion, a relationship might lack depth and connection. But when there's too much emotion without balance, it can create patterns of codependency, emotional burnout, or even manipulation, especially if one partner uses guilt or dramatic expressions to control the other. The real challenge arises when emotion is not balanced with clarity and self-awareness. When individuals don't take time to process what they're feeling or communicate in a calm way, the relationship may become reactive rather than intentional. It's important to recognize that emotions are real and valid, but they shouldn't always dictate actions. Taking a step back during emotional moments, reflecting before responding, and understanding emotional triggers can help prevent unnecessary harm. In the end, emotions are a beautiful part of love, but they need grounding. Otherwise, the relationship might burn too bright and too fast to last. The balance between emotion and logic is what truly makes a relationship sustainable. Love needs passion, but it also needs direction. When partners can strike a healthy balance between what they feel and what they know, the relationship becomes not just intense, but stable, respectful, and long-lasting. Emotion helps us connect, express care, and experience intimacy, while logic helps us manage conflict, set boundaries, and make thoughtful decisions. When both are present, partners can enjoy the depth of emotional bonding without losing themselves or making choices that could harm the relationship in the long run. In a balanced relationship, when one partner is upset, the other doesn't react with equal intensity, but listens, validates the emotion, and tries to find a way forward. This is emotional intelligence in action, recognizing that emotions are important but shouldn't lead to impulsive reactions. At the same time, logical thinking keeps the relationship aligned with shared goals and values. For example, if one person wants to move across the country for work, a purely emotional partner might say, "No, I'll miss you too much." A purely logical partner might say, "Well, it's a good career move, so go." But someone with a balance of both might say, "I'll miss you deeply, but let's figure out how to make this work together. Maybe we can plan visits or talk every night." When couples practice emotional and logical balance, they argue less destructively. Instead of yelling or shutting down, they discuss. Instead of assuming intentions based on feelings, they ask for clarification. This balance brings maturity into the relationship, where both partners feel safe enough to be vulnerable and strong enough to handle difficult conversations. It also builds trust. When someone sees that their partner can feel deeply but also stay calm in tough situations, they feel more secure. This balance also helps avoid extremes. Relationships based only on emotion can become chaotic, while those based only on logic can feel cold. The healthiest relationships recognize that both heart and mind have a role to play. Being overly emotional can lead to clinging or overreacting. Being overly logical can lead to detachment or emotional neglect. But together, emotion brings warmth, while logic brings wisdom. Love is felt, but it also needs to be chosen again and again, especially when things get hard. Finding this balance isn't about being perfect. It's about becoming self-aware, knowing your emotional triggers, understanding your communication style, and learning to pause when things feel too intense. It's about asking yourself, what am I feeling right now? And also, what's the best way to handle this? This mindset allows couples to grow together rather than pull apart during stressful times. Ultimately, a relationship that balances logic and emotion is one that lasts not because it's free of conflict or challenge, but because both partners bring understanding and intention into the relationship. They don't just react, they reflect, respond, and rebuild together. Understanding yourself is the foundation of any healthy relationship, and it becomes especially important when navigating the balance between emotion and logic. When you're self-aware, you begin to recognize your emotional triggers, your thought patterns, and the ways you tend to react under pressure. This awareness gives you the power to pause, reflect, and choose how to respond instead of letting emotions take over or shutting down in the name of logic. It's not just about knowing what you feel or think, but understanding why you feel or think that way. Self-awareness brings clarity to your needs, your boundaries, and your emotional landscape, which helps you communicate more honestly and effectively with your partner. For example, Someone who knows they tend to get anxious when they feel ignored can express this clearly, instead of lashing out or silently building resentment. Rather than saying, "You never care about me," they might say, "When I don't hear from you, I start to feel insecure. I know it's something I'm working on, but I'd appreciate a quick check-in." This kind of communication is only possible when a person has taken the time to reflect on their internal world and can distinguish between emotional reactions and reality. Similarly, someone who knows they tend to overthink things may be more mindful not to let logic override their emotional connection, and instead make space to feel, trust, and be vulnerable. Being self-aware also means you can catch yourself before falling into destructive habits. If you know you tend to withdraw when you're upset, you can learn to speak up instead. If you know you struggle with jealousy, you can explore where that insecurity comes from instead of projecting it onto your partner. These internal check-ins are powerful because they prevent you from putting the entire emotional burden on the other person. You begin to own your feelings and reactions, which is essential for a mature and respectful partnership. Moreover, when you understand yourself, you're more likely to understand others. You begin to see that just like you have emotional patterns, your partner does too. This perspective builds compassion. You may still get frustrated, but you're less likely to jump to conclusions. You become more patient during misunderstandings because you know how complex human emotion can be. Self-awareness builds emotional resilience, the ability to stay steady when things get tough, to communicate without blaming, and to work through conflict instead of avoiding it. It also helps in setting realistic expectations. You stop waiting for your partner to be perfect or for the relationship to always feel amazing. Instead, you start appreciating growth, effort, and emotional presence. You also learn to honor your own values, to walk away from relationships that consistently drain you no matter how strong the emotional pull. In short, knowing yourself helps you love more wisely. You stop chasing fairy tales and start building something real, something rooted in both emotion and logic, and most importantly, in self-respect. Great relationships aren't just about how much you feel or how well you think they're about how well you balance both. Emotion gives love its depth, its beauty, and its spark. Logic keeps it steady, respectful, and safe. When you learn to understand yourself, recognize your patterns, and stay aware of both your heart and your mind, you're not just loving harder, you're loving smarter. So the next time you find yourself caught between what you feel and what you know, take a breath. Ask yourself, is this reaction helping the relationship or hurting it? Is this love sustainable or just intense? Because the real power comes when you can feel deeply and think clearly. Thanks for watching. Now I want to hear from you. In your relationships, do you lead more with emotion or logic? And how has that shaped your experiences? Let's talk in the comments.